Hello and welcome to the special bonus episode of The Dairy Edge. Teagasc are running a weekly Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, which is also being made available as a podcast. On this week's webinar, Stuart Childs speaks to Noel Meehan and Eimear Connery about the on-farm assessment carried out by ASSAP advisors to assess farmers' impact on water quality.
Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to this week's Let's Talk Dairy. And they're all very aware at this stage now about our role and the role that we have to play as farmers and the dairy industry in this case in particular, but all farming elements of farming in the country on water quality. And I suppose, while I'd be a big supporter of farmers and I know Eimear well from that point of view, and I'm sure Noel is the same as well, we'd be strongly behind farmers in terms of that they do make a large effort in order to try and keep water quality right. But we have to acknowledge that there are weaknesses in our systems across the country, and that's what Eimear and Noel's role is, to look at the detail behind where water quality is deteriorating. And I suppose Eimear's job, more so than Noel's, is to actively engage with farmers in the East Cork area in particular on the rivers that have been identified as problems, and trying to get positive solutions to rectify the water quality issues in those areas. So they're just going to give us a presentation in relation to water quality and how the ASSAP program operates, and we'll gladly take questions then in relation to it. So we'll start the way there. So, and I think Noel, you're going to share there for Eimear, and Eimear's going to, or you're going to deliver between you and Chick. All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna just maybe get the ball rolling here, and Eimear is going to come in then at a later date or in a little while. Okay. And listen, just thanks Stuart for inviting us on this morning to talk to the dairy farmers there. So we're really appreciative of it. I'll just share the screen here and we get going. I know people are busy. So I suppose just to set the ball rolling, why are we worried about water quality? And I suppose that the reason is that there's a piece of legislation out there called the Water Framework Directive, and it applies to all waters out there, right? And what we're asked to do as a country is to have what they call good status for all water. So that's your rivers, your lakes, your streams, your coastal, your groundwater. And the good status, what that means, I'm sure you're all aware of a kind of a star rating for hotels. So, you know, good status or high status is 4 or 5 star water is what we need. So if you're 4 or 5 star hotel, well, that's what we need for water quality. We need to have 4 or 5 star water quality. So good status is 4 star, high status is 5 star. And there's various bits of things that the government is doing. They have a certain amount of autonomy in how they can implement it, and they have these things called river basin management plans. And we're in the middle of the second one, or near the end of the second one at the minute. And I suppose the first one didn't go so well, you know, and they pretty much ripped it up and started again, and they came up with a different way of doing it. So the second river basin management plan is a kind of a, you know, the first one was all about regulation and enforcement and kind of blanket regulation, trying to deal with things. And it quickly became obvious that that approach wasn't working. So the second one is a more collaborative engagement kind of process, where we're engaging with the stakeholders, you know, and in this case it's agriculture and farmers that we're talking about, but all the other stakeholders as well, and also with communities, with a view to try and get better buy-in. And then as well as that, we're coming up with a lot more targeted, more focused, more specific solutions to problems in certain areas. So the issues that's been faced in East Cork and the issues that's been faced in Connery with water qualities are very different. So having the same blanket regulations to deal with both doesn't make sense. So that's what this has done. And out of the second one, two things, two new bodies were set up: Law Pro, which is the Local Authorities Waters Programme, and ASSAP, which is the Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory Programme, were set up with a view to engaging directly with farmers on water quality issues that may be out there. So Law Pro are an arm of the local authority, but they're just a step outside. They don't have any enforcement powers or anything like that. And what they do is they assess the streams and identify what's going on, what's the pressure, what's impacting. Is it phosphorus? Is it sediment? Is it nitrogen? Is it pesticides? And they feed that back to the advisors, the ASSAP service, and the ASSAP service then would go and talk to the farmers and identify issues that are on their farms, if there's any, come up with a plan to improve. And Eimear will go through that kind of process with you in a little bit. Okay, so just to put it in context, I suppose what we're looking for here is that we want to be in the green or the blue, needs to be coming back across the page here all the way over if we can at all. And back in 2010, 2012, we were at our best status from the late 80s, early 90s. But I suppose where we are now is broadly in line with where we were in 95, 97, you know. We're nearly back at that point again, where water quality has slipped, and that's despite massive investment by farmers and massive investment by on wastewater treatment plants and all that kind of thing as well. And we're back where we were, you know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So not in a good place at the minute. And I suppose then, you know, just to give a breakdown of where the nutrient is coming from and where the impacts are coming from. And you have a phosphorus and you have nitrogen here. You can see the various different colors in the wheel. For phosphorus, that big orange color there, it relates to wastewater treatment plants. The green and the yellow, that relates to agriculture. So you can see we're probably about a third, agriculture is contributing about a third of the overall phosphorus loading into the system that's out there. For nitrogen, it's a big difference in nitrogen. We're pretty much, you know, 75-80% of it is coming from agriculture. So you have the yellow and the green again, that nitrogen is contributing to the nutrient loading in rivers and streams. And I suppose these are just some maps again. The map on the left-hand side is for phosphorus, and you know, the standard or the status of phosphorus, the rivers with phosphorus in them, and then the one on the right is for nitrogen. So you can kind of see maybe certainly areas where phosphorus is an issue, or you know, in around the border regions there, West Limerick, you know, through the kind of the Midlands and down into the south here. And I think, you know, phosphorus is a function of phosphorus loss is a function of soil type. So you have more losses in heavier soil types. So these would be heavier soil types up here with a bit of intensification, same as this here. And nitrogen then is kind of nearly the opposite. Nitrogen is an issue in free draining soils. And I suppose it's also maybe a function of the, you know, what's going on in the area as well. So if you kind of look from Louth down to maybe, you know, West Cork, that kind of area, that line there, that would be, you know, more free draining, more intensive kind of farming going on in that area, a lot of tillage, a lot of dairying, and, you know, a greater potential for nitrogen to be lost. So, you know, that's what the status of the rivers is telling us as well, you know. So that's just some information there. So I suppose just to give you a feel for what the ASSAP is doing, it's a service that we provide to farmers. It's confidential, it's free. And what we do is we go out and we visit the farm, and we walk through the farm with the farmer beside us, and we have a look at what's going on, and try and identify any areas where there may be issues. And if there is issues, we try and come up with a plan with the farmer to try and improve that. And I suppose just to give the dairy perspective from nationally, like we've visited about 562 farms to the end of December. Unfortunately, like everything else, COVID has impacted us massively over the last 12 months to 7 months where we haven't been able to visit farms. So that's certainly impacting on our ability to get out at the minute. But look, it's impacting everybody as well. So, you know, we find that farmers are very agreeable to advisors coming out. We have 96% of farmers engaging with the ASSAP advisors. And when we also have very good agreement on mitigation actions, and these are the things that we're asking farmers to do. So, you know, 90% of the time what we're asking farmers to do is agreed by the farmer, you know. And it is very much a conversation over and back, you know. The day we're not there to tell you have to do this or have to do that. There's no point. We need to engage with the farmers and say, listen, this is what we think would work. You know, a farmer can say, well, I think this would work. We come up with a discussion and come up with a solution that works for both parties, and hopefully we'll see water quality improvement. So it's very much a discussion and a conversation over and back. So I suppose what we do is we kind of, the assessment broken down into 3 areas. It's looking at land management. What are you doing with your farm, your land? How are you managing it? Are you outwintering in the wrong areas? Are you spreading slurry in the wrong areas of the farm? If you're a tillage farmer, are you are you doing tillage in lands that's not suitable for tillage that could have sediment losses, things like that. And then what can we do about it? Nutrient management as well is obviously a big area, and how you use your nutrients, where you're using them, and when you're using them, and how much of it is going out. I think I'm sure you've heard that a lot from nutrient use efficiency from your dairy advisors. And then we also look at the farmyards, and what we're finding is that the vast majority of the issues are around the nutrient and land management. What happens out in the field, and only a quarter are in around the yards, and people would have maybe expected more to be in around the yards, but no, it's the diffuse losses that we're finding is the big problem. So that kind of identifies, that leads into this slide here, the pie chart. Diffuse phosphorus loss, diffuse nitrogen loss, and diffuse sediment loss accounts for 3/4 of the losses out there. And the point source losses, which is from your farmyards, is 70%. Yeah.
Would you just explain the diffuse loss just to clarify what diffuse means, because it might be familiar to people?
I will, of course. Yeah, I will, of course, Stuart. Yeah, no problem at all. So as I was saying, the point sources are very obvious. It's your pipe or your loss from a farmyard or silage effluent or whatever it is. The diffuse is a different thing, right? And diffuse losses are losses at a field or maybe a farm scale. So these are where you have, you put out slurry out in the field and you get heavy rainfall, and the field gets saturated and the water starts moving across the field, and it starts percolating into the drainage network and into the stream. So that's an example of diffuse loss. So it's at a field or a farm scale. And nitrogen loss is very much diffuse loss, because nitrogen is spread on fields for growing the grass, and when you have excess nitrogen over what the crop requires or the plant requires, there's a potential for that to be leached by heavy rainfall, and that is at a field scale or a farm scale as well. So I hope that kind of explains what diffuse losses are. And sediment is sedimentation, or sediment it's really soil. So it's soil erosion, it's soil losses from fields as well. So where you have badly poached fields, or where you have tillage, or even where you have insufficient grass cover, you can get soil and sediment moving over land. And I suppose don't worry too much about the content of this, because Eimear is going to go through each and every one of these. But what we've done is just taken out the high risk issues that we're finding out in the farm. So these are the issues that are impacting, they're having an impact on water quality. And we go out, we're very confident that these are having an impact. And the usage of your slurries, the time and location, farm roads, nutrient management, phosphorus loss, surface water runoff, so water running over the surface of the land and getting washed into streams and drains, buffers, clean and grey water management, nitrogen leaching, drinking points, silage pits and effluent, and so on, down along there. And Eimear will go through those now for you in a minute. So those are the issues that we're finding. But I suppose the important thing to say is that, okay, there are issues where farmers need to do a bit of work around the farmyard with regards to putting in a better silage slab or a new silage slab or tank and that kind of thing. And those are cross-compliance issues and needs to be rectified regardless of whether the ASSAP advisor is out there or not. But what I'm trying to say is the vast majority of the things that we're asking farmers to do are not expensive. They're really to do with farmers just tweaking what they're doing and when they do it, and being a little bit more aware of things like buffers, and a little bit more aware of weather forecasts, and a little bit more aware of where they might do a bit of supplementary feeding, or where they might push a farm road, things like that. So they're not very expensive measures that we're asking farmers to do. So I'll throw it over there to Eimear now at this stage to take it on from there.
Thanks, Noel.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Okay, so like Noel said, just to reiterate it really, the key message we want to get out to farmers is that very simple changes to your management practice can actually make a really good and positive impact on water quality. So oftentimes it's the really simple things that need to be addressed on farm. So when we're going out doing our farm assessments, and particularly on dairy farms, what I'm going to go through now is just the key issues that Noel has just spoken about, but just go through them in a little more detail. So, and this applies really, I suppose, as well to sometimes when we bring farmers in a catchment and we say, look, we're doing work on water quality. Sometimes the farmer will say, oh, sure, the river is, it's a kilometre away from me, so, there's no need to come here. But really there is, there's potential for nutrients to be lost from every farm and pesticides because of connectivity to the river network. So you may not have a stream or a river on your farm, but if you have in a kind of poorly draining catchment, if you have a lot of open drains on your farm or field drains, and also then in very free draining soil types, you'll have direct connectivity to the groundwater. So whether you have a stream or a river on your farm or not, in one way is irrelevant to a certain extent, because every farm is connected, because of open drains, land drains, and then on free draining soils, because of the nature of the soil, there's a direct pathway down to groundwater. So it does apply to everybody. So what we're finding, as Noel said, the farm assessment that we carry out, it's divided into 3 main areas. So there's the nutrient management side, there's the farmyard and its management, and then there is the land and riparian management. And riparian management is just the stream side or the riverside management. So they're the 3 broad areas that we look at. So to begin with, we have the nutrient management issues. And what really the key things here would be, this is the one that comes up most often, is organic manure timing, location and method. And similarly for chemical fertilizer, the timing of it is really key. So what we would come across a lot is, slurry going out at times when it would be better that it didn't go out. So on very wet, saturated soils, on frozen kind of soils, or when very heavy rain is forecast. In those cases, if slurry is going out and being spread, there's a very strong possibility with heavy rain that an awful lot of that nutrients in the slurry has been washed into the river. Obviously now with the derogation and the new rules there, the method of spreading, the low emission slurry spreading is what we're recommending. The reason for that is that you'll get more nitrogen from your slurry with that method, and therefore that should then in turn reduce your need for chemical fertilizer per field. The other thing there, I suppose, would be what we'd see a good bit is fields that are liable to flooding. So inch fields right beside the river, beside the stream, and they're liable to flood. You'd often see slurry going out on those fields in the shoulder periods of the year where there's still a strong risk that the field could flood. So there's a couple of examples that I've come across where slurry was put out in February. So under cross compliance, he was fully fine, like the open period was there. The slurry went out, but a week later, that field was completely submerged in water. So the vast majority of that slurry ended up going down the river. So that does happen a lot, and it's those kind of simple management practices that we want to try and change really. So again, these things don't cost anything in terms of finances. It's just about the management, the timing of when the slurry and the fertilizer is going out and what fields you pick. So obviously to try and pick the drier fields if it's possible, rather than the wetter fields. So if you can split the farm into the dry fields and the wet fields, apply the fertilizer to the drier fields first, and to have soil temperatures at least above 5.5 degrees and climbing, so that the grass can take up the nutrients. So there's a lot of research done through the Agricultural Catchments Programme, and that's what this graph on the bottom left is showing. There's a lot of research done there about the closed period, because it comes up a lot about the calendar farming and farming by dates. And really where those dates are coming from is that research through the Agricultural Catchments Programme. So over 4 years in a number of different catchments across the country, there was an awful lot of sampling, very intensive sampling done in catchments. And in each one of the catchments, it was found that there is a disproportionately high nutrient loss, so phosphate and nitrate, during the winter period. And that's simply because the grass growth isn't there, the soil temperatures aren't high enough. So the close dates aren't going to change. We just need to adapt as much as possible to try and get the slurry and the nutrients out at the right time and in the right place. So the soil samples, again, I suppose the other things we're finding would be that people have their soil, yeah, I put it up here in my note, but sometimes I suppose they're thrown in the drawer, and other times, it's a complicated document at times, so it is hard, it isn't always the most user-friendly of documents. So really, the key pieces, I suppose, if you were to look at your nutrient management plan, would be the maps, so the color-coded maps. You can see there the lighter color, that's index 1, the light blue is index 2, the green is index 3, and the dark green index 4. So where you're applying, if you can look at your maps at least, and then you'll know which fields require the nutrients. So trying to match the crop requirement and the soil requirement for your nutrients, rather than just putting it out in the field closest to the yard, I suppose, every year. And the soil samples, to know where your soil samples relate to. And trying to get your indexes for phosphate and for potassium and the lime as well would be key. Then you can see there the critical source areas map. So the map, or the picture on the bottom left, that is showing, these maps are developed by the EPA, and really what they're showing is the fields that are most risky for nutrient loss, and where they're being delivered. So where the nutrients are potentially being delivered into field drains and into open drains and into the stream and river network. And really the benefit of these is that we can identify more targeted, I suppose, where nutrients shouldn't be applied. So you can see the picture there on the right hand side. This will be a classic example of where you don't want to put nutrients, slurry or chemical fertilizer in that field maybe a few days before very heavy rain is forecast, because you have a really, really high risk of nutrient loss there with the amount of water that's lodged in that field. You don't want to be out wintering cattle here, or maybe having round feeders here. So it would be those kind of fields in every farm, and you'd all be aware on your own farm where these are, and to try to avoid these areas with nutrients, particularly at the shoulder periods of the year when it's much higher risk of nutrient loss. Okay, Noel, you can skip on to the next one. Okay.
Coming up, yeah.
There's a bit of a delay on my side, but I'll pull it up. Yeah, that's okay. So then in the farmyard, the main issues that we're finding would be, again, kind of clean and grey water management. So your soil yards, trying to make sure that the gutters, downpipes are all in good working order, and that they are taking the clean water away to a clean water drain. The collecting yard or any open feeding yards, that everything that falls in there is collected and contained. That type of material isn't to go into a drain, and to make sure that you have sufficient storage, particularly for soiled water, I suppose, with the increase in cow numbers, the soiled water storage, that might be under pressure, and then you're under pressure to put that out at times when maybe the weather and the soil is saturated, and it would be better not to. In terms of the silage pits and silage effluent, silage effluent, similar to dairy washings, would be extremely polluting. So a small bit of that getting into a river or a drain has a very, very large impact on the ecology of the river. So just to make sure that your silage slabs, that they're not cracked, the diversion points, that they're turned the correct way. So when the silage goes in, that the effluent and that the channel and diversion point is turned into the slatted tank. And I suppose there a couple of years ago, there was a lot of pits that split. I suppose there's bigger volumes of silage going in. So if possible, to have the silage wilted going in. And some people, I suppose, with the increased volume of silage, may need to look at extra silage slabs and so on. The same with slurry storage then, I suppose, increased cow numbers, and in some cases people haven't been able to get the extra slurry storage yet. But where that leads to a problem with water quality is more that you're under pressure then to get the slurry out at a time where there's a high risk of a lot of nutrients getting into the river network. So in the picture there in the bottom left, what happened there was slurry was spread when the ground was frozen and there was some snow on it, and the slurry was spread. But it's when that snow melts then it carries a lot of the nutrients with it and straight down into the river. So that's the issue really with slurry storage. Yeah.
There's just a question there. Yeah. That's right. Connected to what you're just saying there. So this the question is like if and as you said already, from a cross compliance point of view, the farmer is fully correct. But if your tanks are full in mid-February and there's a lot of rain forecast, what do you do in that scenario? Then you're compliant in terms of you have the storage. You've been trying to hold on for as long as possible, but the weather just isn't in your favor. Is there any advice that you can give to people in terms of trying to mitigate against a major loss in that scenario?
Well, there's no magic wand, I suppose, but if you are under pressure and the weather is going against you, we're not looking at slurry storage per se, so we're not going out measuring tanks or anything like that, because that's all there under cross compliance. The only thing I'd say to try and reduce the losses, if you did have to put it out, is to try and put it in the drier fields, number one, and then if you can, to try and keep away from the field with the river beside it, so the inch fields or the wetter fields, to keep away from those. If you do have to put it into a field where you have, say, open drains or streams or rivers in it, try and keep the buffer back. It's meant to be 5 meters from open drains, streams or rivers. That doubles then to 10 meters. For people in Cork, it's the middle of January to the end of January that it's a 10-meter buffer. So if you're in that time frame, make sure the 10-meter buffer is there. But if you can extend that buffer even further back, all the better, because you're reducing the chance of the slurry getting down as far as the river or the stream. And avoid fields that are very heavily sloped down towards the river, because the runoff, it's very easy for the runoff to go directly. But there is no magic wand, or there's no magic mitigation. It's I suppose really it's to try and work back and see where the tank's empty for the coming year, to try and see, are the tanks empty going into the winter? Do you possibly need more slurry storage? Is there water getting in somewhere? Is the soiled water going into the tanks? Things like that then to plan forward. But other than that, to try and keep the slurry away from the drains and the streams and the rivers, and keep the buffer zone back as far as you possibly can. Is that okay?
And
so you can discuss it again after anyway.
And just put out the bare minimum, I suppose, to get you by in that scenario too. Like, I mean, I can understand where that person's coming from. We'll say you might be full since, or you're after holding on until mid-February in the hope to spread it in better weather, and yet the weather is possibly deteriorating instead. Like, and now you're getting into an animal welfare issue nearly at this stage because the slurry coming up. So bare minimum, and and maximise the buffer zones to all open drains or rivers or anything really. That's
probably as best you can do. The other thing there, the drain connection from the yard to water. So what we've come across in some cases would be where dairy washings in the pit are directly going into a drain. So again, dairy washings is very, very polluting. So to avoid that, like, no direct connection from any polluting material to go into drains. So to check those type of things within the yard, they'd be the main. That's like a broad overview of what we're finding, I suppose. Round bale storage would be another one where they're wet and there's effluent coming out of them. So there's things like that that we would look at anywhere that nutrients are escaping from the yard. Okay, Noel, you can move on there. So this is what we found in a couple of places then where you have that constant drip feed of nutrients. So it would be relating back to the last one there where you have a drain connection from the yard. So the picture on the left-hand side there shows that was outside a farmyard, and what was happening there was some dairy washings and a little bit of seepage from a dung heap going into that drain. But what you can see in that drain is sewage fungus, and it's very distinctive. So you'll always know if you see that in a drain or a stream that it is a constant drip feed of nutrients. So the dairy washings is coming in there twice a day, morning and evening. So it's constant, the nutrients are constant there. And the same with the picture on the right-hand side. That was, again, dairy washings that was going directly into the drain and not being collected in the yard. And again, you can see that kind of sewage fungus. It's a scummy growth. And if anyone was to look into that river, straight away, then that there is a nutrient issue. And what we do with our colleagues in Law Pro is, if that's found, we work our way back up. You're 9 times out of 10 looking for a pipe. And when you find that pipe, then that's your connection to the not the culprit, but to where the source of the nutrients are coming from. And again, it's important to say, and I know Noel said it already, is that we are non-regulatory. We're completely voluntary and confidential. So if we're coming to you about an issue like this, you're not getting in trouble. There's no penalty associated with it. We're just trying to rectify the problem and improve the water quality and move on. So that's what we are finding, definitely, in a number of cases. Okay, Noel, we'll move on again. And then when it comes to the land management issues, the general things that we're finding, or the most common things that we're finding, would be not adhering to the buffer zones. So like we said there, the 5 metre buffer zone applies for slurry spreading from anything that can carry water. So that includes open drains, streams and rivers. And for your chemical fertilizer, it's a 2 metre buffer. So you can see in the picture there, and that's a dairy farmer up in the west of the country, but they have a really wide buffer there, a vegetated buffer, and the river is just behind that. So the river is very well protected in this case, and the farmer has also then left another good buffer where he stopped spreading the slurry. So the river is very well protected there, rather than where you'd see the slurry spread right up to the edge of the river. So the buffer zones would be the no spread zones that we would look for. In terms of the farm roads and the gateways and underpasses, that's obviously come in now as part of the nitrates regulation as well, that you have to divert all runoff from the roadways away from drains and streams and rivers. So the recambering, so that is coming up an awful lot as well. The nitrate then for the soils, for farmers down the south and southeast of the country, nitrate is the big issue down here, because the nitrogen, when you apply it, it doesn't bind to the soil, so it's very easily lost. So again, what you're looking at there is the right rate, the right product. So we're looking to aim to use more protected urea, because it's a slower release fertilizer. So there's a less likelihood of the nitrate being lost because of the form that protected urea comes in. Then the drinking points and the stream fencing, you can see the picture there in the bottom right. Obviously, we want to avoid that. I suppose that would be maybe extreme, but so you're still allowed to cross your cows across through a river, but you have to drive them straight through and then fence off either side. So no loitering around in the stream like this. Okay, Noel. So the nitrogen, as I said, or the nitrate, that's easily lost by leaching. So if you put it on too much, more than the grass can take up, and you get heavy rain, you get it leached down into the groundwater. It's different then for phosphate and sediment, that's lost by overland flow. So you can see the picture there in the left-hand side. You have a reseeded field, so a large reseeded field, and it slopes down towards the river. And you can see the water there, how it is, it's just directly coming into the river. It's quite brown, so there's a lot of sediment or soil, sand, silt or clay in it. And that the sediment has a negative impact on the river water quality as well. So really there in that picture, it's the source of the bare earth that you can see just back up a little bit. That bare soil is a source of sediment. It's very close to the river, and there's no kind of adequate buffer there, or riparian margin. There's no woody, there's no trees along it to help slow down the flow of water, really is what you want to do there, to allow that sediment to settle out of the water before it gets into the river. The other thing with that picture is, and it's just the way I suppose agriculture has gone, the field that's receded is a very large field. So if you were to look at the old historic maps for that field 100 years ago, there would have been an awful lot more fields and hedgerows there. So there's less stuff to hold the water on the landscape, and the water is moving off the landscape quicker. The rain is coming now, much heavier downpours. So there's less kind of there's less there to slow down the flow of water and allow nutrients and sediment to settle out of it. So if you just press again there, Noel, a couple of times, so you can see then on the picture on the right hand side, these are new maps that the EPA have developed, and these maps will be publicly available in hopefully in another month or so. And what these are showing is where nutrients are likely to flow over land. So these will be available for every farmer across the country. And what they'll allow us to do is have a much more targeted approach to when we go out to a farm. We'll have these maps with us, and we'll be able to see off the map where nutrients are likely to flow and where we could put in our mitigation measures. So the black there is a high likelihood of nutrient loss, and the red is a very high likelihood of nutrient loss. These are based on soil type, stock and rate, elevation, topography, and hydrogeology. So there's a lot of kind of information in the background to develop these maps. But you can see where the green circles are. They would be called these focus flow delivery points. So that's where the nutrients are getting into the river. So that's where we would target our measures to help prevent. These would be in particular now for phosphate and sediment loss. The nitrogen is all about source control, so the amount of fertilizer going out. The yellow line there is where you might potentially put a hedgerow. We'd need to ground truth all of these, so there can be, these might be different when you go out on the ground and walk the farm, but it's just an example of where things are going and how much more targeted it'll be going forward. Okay, so we'll go on to the next one there. So these are the types of measures that we're talking about that would go into those green circles or the yellow lines. So these measures, these mitigation measures, are all things that help reduce phosphorus loss and sediment loss. And these all have a co-benefit then for biodiversity and for greenhouse gases potentially, and carbon storage. So you have a treatment train there at the top left-hand one, where water will come in, and it's like a settlement pond, but there's 3 of them. So it would allow the water and nutrients to settle out. Engineered ditches are another one. Wetlands and ponds and vegetated buffer zones, or even riparian tree planting. So planting of native trees in wet areas, in those critical source areas, would help to slow down the flow of water and allow the nutrients and sediment to settle out. So these are the type of things that we'll be looking at much more, I'd say, going forward in those targeted critical source areas. Okay, so we're nearly finished there now. You can move on to the next one again there, Noel. So this is, yeah.
Am I right in thinking that those engineered wetlands and things are actually going to be allowed under BPS now? I think I read something about that recently.
Yeah, so it's in the terms and conditions for this year that any measures that a farmer puts in place that will improve the Birds Directive, the Habitats Directive, or the Water Framework Directive, that they will be eligible for BPS going forward. So if someone was putting in a measure like this, then yes, it is eligible, but it has to be mapped out on your BPS. And it's a change to the eligible area. So it's not a separate map, but you do have to request a change to your eligible area on the BPS. So that is there in the terms and conditions. I suppose just to prefix it by saying, wetlands, sometimes you just have to be careful where they're sited. If it's in an SAC, a special area conservation, or different things like that, there may be issues with planning. But I suppose if anyone is interested, they can talk to us and we can advise them on it. It's probably the best approach on that. So just to say a few words on sediment and why it's a problem, you can see in the picture here, so there's a drinking point there up in the top right, and you can just see the discoloration in the water. And that is a problem because the light, it reduces the light getting into the stream, and that affects the ecology within the stream. So the other issue then is, you can see the 2 bottom pictures here. The one on the left is a lovely clean gravel bed river. And you can see just in the front of that picture there, these freshwater pearl mussels, and they're filter feeders, and they're extremely, I suppose they're quite rare now across Europe, but Ireland has one of the best populations of these, but they are actually only in, we'll say, kind of the lowly or the less intensive catchments in, say, North Kerry, West Cork, Donegal, Mayo. But they are very sensitive to this sediment, and you can just see the difference or the contrast between those two pictures on the bottom. The one on the right hand side is where a lot of sediment is getting in, and it clogs the bed of the stream. So the gravel beds, the spawning beds are completely covered, and it has a very negative impact on water quality going forward. And sediment brings nutrients with it as well. So that's just the problem with sediment. And so if we flick on to the next one there, Noel, please. So you can see here, this is just one that we came across. It's just a river, a very fast flowing river, and very erosive. So it's quite dynamic. It changes, and it's undercutting. You can see there that the bank of the river is going to fall in. So the farmer wants to do something about that, and you can see that the farming is coming right up to the edge of the river there. So there's no riparian margin there, or kind of long vegetation or woody material growing there. So there's nothing to hold the bank of the river together. So just two of the options that would be possible here would be willow planting and rock armouring. And I have to preface this by saying you must contact Inland Fisheries if you're going down the road of rock armouring or anything to do with touching the bed of the river in particular. So just going to the next one there, and this is one of the final slides. These are just some of the solutions that can be put in place. So the one on the left hand side there is rock armouring that was taking place. That's out in Kanturk. And it was done in conjunction with Inland Fisheries Ireland. And now they, generally speaking, don't have a problem with any of that type of work. But where the issue is on the timing. The timing is critical. So you can't do it when fish are spawning. And the best thing is that you contact Inland Fisheries Ireland directly before you do anything to the river at all. But you can see the rock armouring there, that it fits in well, you know, and it's working quite well. And the one on the right hand side then is just where the river was eroding the bank there. All the farmer did in that case was put willow slips in. So you just literally put the willow slips in at an angle, and once you put willow in, it'll just take off. It really, the problem with willow is actually trying to control it and keep it under control rather than establishing it. But the whole idea there is that the willow roots will really hold the bed of the bank of the river together and keep it from falling in. So the final slide there, Noel. Perfect. So the summary then, just to say, water quality is declining. And from agriculture, the main issues are diffuse phosphate and sediment losses, nitrate losses. There are still point sources are still an issue. Soil type, weather, and farm practice. The three of those things combined all influence water quality. So we'll leave it at that. So if there's any questions, myself or Noel would be happy to take them.
Yeah, so Eimear, that's great. Thanks very much. That was really interesting. I suppose the problem that people probably encounter is like trying to get the balance right, we'll say, from the angle that I come from with the production side versus what you're trying to promote as well. And it's trying to marry the two together to get the right solution for us both. So like we'll say, are people that are putting out nutrient there in mid-January, are they, if everything is right, like you said, the soil conditions are good at the time, the temperatures are good at the time, and they apply their 2,000-3,000 gallons of slurry, or they put out their half bag urea, is there a period of time then that they need to be, that they're at risk of loss? So like you said about the heavy rainfall events, but like if you do it on a Wednesday and it's the following Wednesday before the heavy rainfall comes, is there still loss associated with that application then, or what's the situation?
Well, for the river, if you have a week between when you get that heavy rainfall, a lot of the nutrients should be taken up. But I suppose the key thing is the soil temperature. Is the grass growing, and is the grass growing enough to take up the nutrients? So that would be the key one, really, the soil temperature along with the weather. The other one for losses there would be the losses up to the atmosphere. So I suppose the later you can leave it, the better it is for the environment in general. I know that doesn't tie in entirely with the the production side of it, and I suppose is trying to get a balance. If you are putting it out earlier, like say, put out, you know, the minimum, and to keep the buffer zones would be really, really important. And
I
Noel, do you
know
want to
both
add
of
on
you.
to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Noel. Sorry.
Yeah, just to come in. Yeah, sorry, Stuart. Just to come in there, like, you know, it's a very good question, and you're right that it's to try and get that balance right between getting the grass going, because we know how important it is for the dairy industry to have grass cover and to have adequate grass and get them out as early as you can. It's a far more profitable system, and you know, getting the nutrient out early, you know, it is a double-edged sword. You know, you will get a certain bounce from it, but I suppose your query about you know, the losses, you're more likely to get the losses earlier in the season, because you know, the soil temperatures, even though you know this spring was quite mild, you know, there was the soil temperature were good from, you know, early, and maybe even all through the winter. I'm not exactly sure now, but certainly from mid February, the soil temperatures were very good. But you know, there was a period there down in your part of the country where you got serious rainfall in late February there. You know, there was, you know, all that flooding that you had down there. So what happened to that nutrient that was out before that? You know, the growth rate wasn't there to use up all that nutrient. And look, it's a fine balance. You know, I can't say, you know, not to do it, but you just need to be that bit more careful and to try and hold off. The later you can hold off. If you have a good autumn rotation planner, a lot of grass covered there, you know, just because it's the 15th of January or the 1st of February, you might need to go out then. You can hold off later, just to hold it off as best you can. Maybe don't blanket spread the whole farm. If there's a couple of paddocks that's behind that you feel it might benefit, maybe target those ones. But certainly, you know, we have to become an awful lot smarter on how we use our nutrients, particularly in that January, February, up until March, up until now time of the year, and again then at the back end in September, October with our slurries. You know, that is where we're losing the most of the nutrients, and that's where a lot of the damage has been done. Not as bad from this time of the year on. Soils are the moist soils are drier. There's not as much moisture moving through it. The growth rates are better. The days are longer. You're going to get a better bang for your fertilizer coming out. So I think the message is to try and minimize as best you can what you put out in that January, February period of the year. I understand that some has to go out, but try and minimize it as best you can.
Yeah, and Eimear, I suppose, just from your visits to the farms, then, like, you didn't identify. I was a bit surprised even by Noel's figure there that 24% only coming from the farm issues. But would you see a lot of trouble in terms of that grey water that you described, that, like, would say chutes broken and leading into tanks actually that are possibly creating problems on farms? Like, we often talk about extra storage, but are we managing the storage that we have well enough in many farms from the examples that you've seen so far on your travels?
Yeah, definitely we would. Yeah, a lot of chutes and gutters and that broken, and it's because you know, like anything, if you see something every day, you say, oh, I'll do that, but it doesn't get done. So yeah, there would definitely be a proportion of that. And then the other one really would be the dairy washings in the pit, that can often be going straight to a drain. Or, you know, just that kind of general run, like from the workings and the business of the yard and the movement of, you know, there's so much happening particularly in a dairy farm. The yard is, you know, it's very hard to keep a yard very, very clean. So there's always going to be some little bit of a run out of it. And it's really just trying to minimize that. But yeah, it is that kind of grey water, you'd call it. So it's not soiled water sometimes, but it's not clean water. You wouldn't drink it either. That water kind of, you know, it's a little bit, I mean, it's so little amount of phosphate that causes a problem in a river. It's 200 grams per hectare. So it's tiny. So it's that kind of grey water that really does actually accumulate. If there's a little bit coming from your farm and everyone's farm, then it does accumulate, and that has a knock-on effect then in the river ecology. And it's a tiny amount really that we're talking about sometimes. So those little things in the yard, yeah, they are an issue definitely, and they're just the things that you kind of put in the long finger really more than anything, I think.
Yeah, and I suppose, and I think Marion Beecher talks about plan, do, review all the time. And I think this is a good time of the year now. We're still probably have cows housed around the country because of a bit of tightness in grass quantity at the minute. But when the housing period is finished, it's probably a good time to actually kind of think about the winter that's just gone and look at those scenarios and review them and correct them maybe. The other thing then you mentioned, the dairy washings, like that's a major source of serious volumes of water really on dairy farms. Is there any good solution to that dairy farmers could implement to reduce the quantity? Like, and I think you said it in the presentation as well, often that can be going into the slurry storage tanks, which is ultimately creating the scenario on the 15th of January or the 13th of January where people are panicking because their tank is now full with what is, for all intents and purposes, a lot of water really that is slightly polluted, depending on the amount of milk that might be in it. But so, have you seen anything good on farm to reduce the quantities?
I haven't come across anything yet now, and a lot of what we're doing, like we've done a lot of farm visits, and then COVID came, so that delayed us a lot. But the mitigation measures now is the next kind of really critical piece, like on farm, those engineered ditches or the wetlands, trying to get more of those in place to see, you know, how they would help to lessen what's going in and in these targeted areas. But the dairy washings, I suppose a lot of, you know, with the increase in numbers, maybe some of the tanks haven't increased in line with that. And that going into the slurry storage then is a problem because you are under pressure then, like, and that is common enough, all right, that the tanks are just filling up too quickly, and sometimes it is a lot of water getting into the tanks. So I don't know, Noel, do you want to add anything to that?
I think I'll jump in there. I think you probably hit on it there with that quote from Marion Beecher. Like, I think now is a good time for farmers, particularly if you've undergone expansion the last while, to get your advisor out, sit down and have a proper honest look at what you have. The rules are very clear, they're very black and white with regards to slurry storage, dairy washing storage, all that kind of thing. And I think it'll be a great day's work if you sat down with your advisor, and had an honest look at your silage pit. Is it big enough? Have you enough of effluent storage? Have you enough of slurry storage? Have you enough of dairy washing storage? Do up a plan, and there is TAMs there available still. There is a planning process to be gone through, most likely for most people. So it'll take the guts of 9 to 12 months before you'd be, if you needed to do something fairly major, it'll take the guts of 9 to 12 months before you'd be able to, before it'd be shovel ready, for want of a better way of putting it. So I think it'll be a very good exercise for every farmer that's on the call there today now to do that, particularly if you've expanded in the last number of years, to get to know where you are. Because look at we know from local authorities, from talking to EPA and the department, that the incidences of slurry going out during the closed period, Jack Nolan has referenced it on more than one occasion. The department knows what's going on, and I suppose that won't be allowed to persist. I'd imagine by the regulators, they won't allow that to happen much longer. They'll start making those calls, looking for that kind of information. So I think it'll be in farmers' best interest just to put a bit of time into that and try and get it sorted if they can at all.
I suppose, Noel, just following on from that, I think I can't remember what the term that they're using for it, but the department are actually working with the Sentinel satellites, I think, at the moment, and they actually will be in a position to nearly pinpoint the date when material was spread, potentially within the next couple of years. So people would want to be very conscious of that. Like, I mean, there's no doubt about it. There's been an increase in the amount of closed period spreading that has been going on. I suppose, for want of a better way of describing it, a blind eye has been turned to it, but it's been noticed at the same time. And we're really shooting ourselves in the foot in reality, aren't we?
Yeah, look at it. And in fairness, majority farmers are doing their best and abiding by the rules, and are probably headed up to here with rules. But the reality is that there's some that aren't, and they're unfortunately they're dragging down the good name of the farmers that are compliant and doing their best. And those are the ones that need to really take a look at what's going on and rectify the problems. It's cross compliance. There's rules and regulations there. Okay, maybe the penalties mightn't impact that severely on the overall income of a farmer. But they're still there. It's a no-brainer, really. If you're going to be at this thing, you need to have your house in order. It will, long term, it will, remove some of the criticism that's there of farming at the minute, because there is some criticism there. And, unfortunately, with social media and that, people jump on things and without fully understanding what's going on. That's the way of the world at the minute. So, I think it would be a really, really good exercise for every farmer just to sit down with an advisor and do up those sums and figure it out. And if there's a deficit, go ahead and make a plan and do something about it. It'll future-proof your farm and make you have less things to worry about and your day-to-day business. You have enough to worry about besides having to worry about a department inspection or a county council inspection. So relieve that pressure off yourselves.
Yeah, I suppose Eimear as well. Like, coming back to the point that you were making about the grey water again. If you do that plan and do a review kind of scenario, and there's probably scope for a lot of the grey water that is created not to have to be collected during the close period, because a lot of those yards aren't necessarily, they're not dirty yards during close period, but they tend to probably be still feeding water into tanks and so forth. So minor enough works. Have you seen that minor enough works can actually resolve those things, like light diversion traps and so forth?
Yeah, and I suppose what probably we might see more of would be planted filter drains and things like that, where that grey water that doesn't need to be collected now under nitrates. So we're not talking about soiled water, and we're not talking about slurry or silage effluent or dairy washings or anything like that. But that grey water that is just, I suppose, where the yards, it's just that stuff that doesn't need to be collected can go into filter drains. So you would have kind of a slope in it, and you would have maybe kind of 2 or 3 dams in it, so that the nutrients can be taken up by growing vegetation, and the nutrients can be taken out of it that way. So we may see more that type of thing going forward, or willow beds. I've seen some people put those in to deal with the runoff from farm roadways. But really what we don't know enough yet, I suppose, is how these will work and how they'll function. And, I suppose that's kind of going to come more and more now, and monitoring these to see the intake and the outtake of it, and how the nutrient is being taken out to make sure that they are actually working. So I do see a lot of that kind of stuff going forward. And like the willow beds or the reed beds or things like that will, like you said, they'll be eligible under or under a single farm payment going forward as well. So that's a big plus, that those elements will be, that you'll still get payment on them. You won't feel like you're losing out completely with putting these features in place. Because a big issue really has been across the country, the fact that you get a letter to say that you're overclaiming on scrub, and a lot of times that scrub is beside the river, so it's been taken away, and that has been protecting the river. So that's a really big plus now going forward, that the department have changed that for us. That is a really, really big plus going forward, definitely.
Yeah, and just the final question then, Eimear, in relation to the willow on the bank of the river. Has it actually been put into the bank or up on the bank? Just from the picture that you showed there earlier, it looked like it was actually being stuck into the bank early. Yeah,
it's into the side of the bank. So you can do it either way, really. I suppose you can put it on the actual field side, we'll say, on the bank, or in that picture it was into the side of the bank. So it was just a little slip of willow that was grown locally. He didn't buy them or anything. They were what was grown locally. They were just pruned off another tree, because willow will really, really, it takes off quite well, particularly where the ground is wet. And it's just stuck in, but just to have it at an angle so that the water can run off of it. But you can put it into the side of the bank or on the top of the bank. That doesn't really matter too much. The real key thing is that the roots are going to kind of help stabilize the bank going forward. Once they've established, they'll hold the bank together, so you won't get that loss of land really into the river.
Right, so it's just gone 11:02, so we'll wrap it up with that. I'd just like to say thanks to both yourself and Noel for coming on and joining me today as part of Water Quality Week. It's good to have you on to talk to the dairy farmers in relation to it. Oh, hang on, there's just one quick one here. Have you any work done on products like sowback and chemical-free regenerative farming? Is it a runner in highly stocked farms? That's a a $64 million one for both of you now, I tell you that much. I leave the answer that one.
No, look, I think what we're finding actually in the ASSAP is this kind of thing. You know, there's a gap in research around a lot of things. What that question is, you know, I don't think we have much. I know there's a bit of work going on in Johnstown Castle, and they're beginning to start looking at these sort of alternatives and, you know, different feed additives and things like that as well, you know. So it has identified gaps in research, not just in Teagasc, but you know, Europe-wide. It's just not there because we're finding out more and more problems, you know. So look, can't answer you that one now, I'm afraid, Kevin. But look, just I suppose just before we finish up, just to reiterate, like, you know, I suppose in the area that most dairy farming is in, the farmyards is not an issue. It's diffuse nitrogen loss is the issue. You know, it's clearly the issue there. So, you know, every farmer needs to use that nitrogen as carefully as they can. And the shorter periods of the year, that January, February, maybe a bit of March, that's where a lot of it is lost. Also, in September, October, over the winter period. So if each farmer can think about how they use their nitrogen in those periods of the year, you know, it'd be to do themselves and their industry a great service if they could minimize the losses during that period, because, you know, the EPA are looking very closely at these kind of things and know they can tell, they'll be coming out and telling agriculture how much nitrogen is lost out of a catchment in a year, and what's the reduction required. And I know in one of the catchments in West Cork, you know, it's a bag of can per acre per year is being lost, you know. So that's, you can do up the maths yourself and the sums about that after yourself. So, you know, it's really around the nitrogen that the dairy farmers need to look at and try and get greater efficiency and use of nitrogen there if they can at all.
I suppose just to wrap it up, Noel, just in kind of following on from what Kevin's question there, I suppose we underestimate the power of lime. Our soil pH status across the entire country is a bit underrated, really, maybe, and we need to do a lot more on that. And it increases nutrient use efficiency, which you mentioned earlier on as well. So it actually increases the capacity of the soil to use the nutrient. So I think we need to, before we start running down rabbit holes after expensive products potentially now, and I'm not knocking any product when I say that now, but we can start at the very basics of lime in the first place. And that'll even actually activate P in soil and K that's in soil already, as well as improving nitrogen use efficiency as well. So yeah. I think they're probably, like Eimear mentioned, the soil maps there and targeting the fertilizer at the right spots. Lime is critical to that as well. So, okay, so I think, as I said, we've just gone over the hour there. I'd like to thank you both very much for coming on. It was very interesting to talk to you, and we'll talk again probably later in the year, maybe just to gee up people maybe in advance of the close period potentially or something. Just there's very good information there. I really enjoyed that now, so thanks very much.
That's all for this week's Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, and don't forget to look out for more bonus episodes each week. I'll be back with our usual Dairy Edge interview on Monday, so do listen in then. I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and thanks for listening.